So, hello, I'm Brent Michael Davids. Can you hear me okay? And it's all good? Okay. I'm not sure what to say about this, but I thought I'd just talk a little bit about my own Mohican background. Our tribe, there's a big diaspora. All the Mohicans, Lenapes, and Munsees all got driven away from the area and diasporaed into two tribes of Lenape went to Oklahoma. The Delaware tribe of Indians in Oklahoma, they're about 10,000. And the Delaware Nation, they're a lot smaller. They're like us. And then we got finally ended up in Wisconsin. And it's a long Trail of Tears kind of story. So I'm living in Wisconsin now on the reservation in the Stockbridge Munsee community. Stockbridge actually is the name of the town that displaced us in our final days in Massachusetts. So in the Berkshires. That was one of the places where we lived, and that's where my direct lineage is from. It's from the Stockbridge line. I'm a direct descendant of Aplamut, a chief from the Lenape, Munsee Mohican community in Stockbridge, and we got driven out of there in kind of this elaborate land scheme, debtor's prison scheme, where about 20 years before the Revolutionary War, so about 1740s, maybe 1750s, till about 1788, like 20 years after the Revolution, there was this scheme, they were going to take the land from us, the townspeople. They developed a dual township. So there was a white township, which is considered Stockbridge, and they built it right there. And they also had an American Indian, what they call proprietorship. And in that proprietorship, they were trying to protect us. So they appointed a non-native minister to sort of help with protecting our land. And so they put all of our land in kind of a trust arrangement with the Indian proprietorship. So we couldn't sell or lose our lands without going before the general court in Boston to discharge the land. So that they thought that would be protection for us, but we ended up not having any trade. We couldn't sell anything. We didn't own banks. We didn't do anything. Really, the only value we had in terms of the white township was our land. So they would charge us and put us in debt, and the Christian church decided, to be good Christians, we want you to not live down in your tribal community, down in that village, way down in the valley down there. We want you to come up here and live along Main Street and live in houses, which meant more debt, changing our culture. So the more and more debt we became, we would get put in prison, and we couldn't get out. And because we were a part of this Indian proprietorship, the land, we were actually at one point begging to give our land away, to be released from prison and be released from poverty. It was a really horrible situation to be in. And we left Stockbridge in 1788, was our last year there. There was still one little strip of land that had been unclaimed of our original territory, and that's the strip that went right down Main Street in the road. Like the strip in the middle of the road, no one had claimed. So they had to sell that off, and then at the end of the road was this burial mound that we had our ancestors buried in, and that hadn't been claimed either. So we signed away those lands, and we put a stipulation on the burial mound that it could never be overturned or dug up or disturbed in any way. So whoever owned it thereafter had to preserve it, and it's still there at the end of this Main Street. So by the end of the 1700s, we were completely gone, but the name stuck. So we're called Stockbridge Indians or Stockbridgers, but we're really Mohicans, coming from that time. And the original name, like if you want to say the Hudson River, we would just call it Mohicanuk. Mohican, it literally means tidal river estuary, or the waters that ebb and flow, the waters that flow backwards, the waters that or always moving, whatever acronym you want to give. It's basically Mohican, and the "uk" at the end of the word simply means at. So when we refer to us like Apamut, we refer to who he was, he would just say Mohicanuk. He's at the Mohican, was where we lived. From a Lenape standpoint, you would say Mohicantuk is a more formal way of saying the Mohican place, the place of the Mohicans. And that meant it's a dual meaning. It's the place where the Mohicans lived, and it's also a place where the river was, the tidal river estuary. And then the Munsee would say it Mohicanatuck, a different way of saying it, but it's basically also the place where the Mohicans are, or the place where the Mohican River is. So basically the Mohicans are the river Indians of the Mohican, Mohicanuk. And there's a lot more to say about that, like when Henry Hudson sailed in 1609, the first two Indians he met at the lower mouth of the river were Mohicans. So we had territory that spanned all the way up here, all the way up and down the river, Vanderbilt Mansion, Roosevelt Estate, West Point, Woodstock, Saugerties, all the way up through here, Red Hook, Bard, all the way around the entirety of Albany, Troy, all the way up to Williamstown, and then all the way east into Massachusetts, down to the Berkshires, Great Barrington. That's all Mohican territory. And so, we lost it all, and we got sent to a reservation in Wisconsin. We were lucky to get it, and we're 1,500 people strong, so really tiny. And so that's where I'm coming from, and I was like, living in the shadow of this James Fenimore Cooper story. Now, he got the story wrong. He messed up a lot of points. He confused two different tribal groups together, the Pequot Mohicans, which is a different group entirely there, Pequot speaking, and we're Delawarean speaking people, so completely different language family. And so I decided to just do my own spoof. So I put James Fenimore Cooper in an older story. There's an old story about, it's a cannibal giant story. There are a lot of cannibal giants stories in Lenape, Munsee, and Mohican history. And the cannibals they don't know how to communicate very well. And if they act like they're not people, like they're not a relative, which is important for Native people. We have this idea of being a relative. We're all related. Be related. Act like a cherished relative. But they're a sort of anti-people who don't behave well. They don't treat each other well. They don't think about, what the community would be good for the community. They act alone. They do things backwards. They don't know how to communicate. And if you attack them, they have skin that's hard as rock, and you can't hurt them with arrows or any kind of weapons. And they are cannibal giants. They go from village to village eating people. Like they'll hear about some village in the winter, there's a cannibal giant out there, eating people, and they'll hear about it in the village, and they all worry, and they have kind of interesting magical powers, which I don't want to give away because we hear it in the piece. But so I made Cooper a character in the story, and it's called, The Last of James Fenimore Cooper. I'd like to read this little critique. I'm not a Cooper, literary critic, but Mark Twain had something to say about Cooper, so I'd like to read his. Cooper's gift in the way of invention was not a rich endowment. But such as it was, he liked to work it. He was pleased with the effects, and indeed he did some quite sweet things with it. In his little box of stage properties, he kept 6 or 8 cunning devices, tricks, artifices for his savages and woodsmen to deceive and circumvent each other with, and he was never so happy as he's working these innocent things and seeing them go. A favorite one was to make a moccasined person tread in the tracks of a moccasined enemy, and thus hide his own trail. Cooper wore out barrels and barrels of moccasins in working that trick. Another stage property that he pulled out of his box pretty frequently was the broken twig. He prized his broken twig above all the rest of his effects, and he worked it the hardest. It was a restful chapter in any book when somebody doesn't step on a dry twig and alarm all the reds and whites for 200 yards around. Every time a Cooper person is in peril, and absolute silence is worth $4 a minute, he is sure to step on a dry twig. If Cooper had been an observer, his inventive faculty would have been worked better, not more interestingly, but more rationally, more plausibly. Cooper's proudest creations in the way of situations suffer noticeably from the absence of the observer's protecting gift. Cooper's eye was splendidly inaccurate. Cooper seldom saw anything correctly. He saw nearly all things as through a glass eye darkly. So this is the last of James Fenimore Cooper for a narrator and string quartet, a combination of an old snow monster story and the original Cooper story. There is a legend among the early inhabitants of North America about a foreigner who came spreading a message of harmony and reconciliation. And the legend says he had a good heart, a big heart, and that's why they called him the pacemaker. Long before this legend, however, North America was the land of the Mohicans, or the people of the waters that are never still. And even today it's called Tunpauakai, or Turtle Island. Many other kinds of people live on Turtle Island as well. Animal people, bird people, rock people, and of course, human people, each with their own customs. All of these other people get along well with each other. Except for the monsters who try to eat the people. These monsters are snow beasts abominable monsters known as Bigfoot and Sasquatch. And they are all cannibal giants. And these monsters are the story of his fate. The last of James Fenimore Cooper. You see, snow beasts are fierce. They can make trees tremble, and when they walk, mountains rumble. Their skin is hard as rock. No weapons can hurt the beasts. Their heads are large and look too big, even for their giant bodies. The snow beasts do not know how to communicate, even with each other, and they feed on people. They can only live in cold places, and their hearts are cold as ice. And you must be careful, because snow beasts can change form to look like familiar people, shape-shifting to someone you may know, quite often masquerading like a relative, like a cousin or an uncle. The only way to see a snow beast is by what it does, how it behaves. If someone is behaving like a relative, they are. But if they're trying to consume everyone around them, it might be a snow beast. The James Fenimore Cooper story begins when the first visitors come to Turtle Island and encounter every toil and danger of the wilderness. The hardy colonist and the trained European who fights at his side frequently expend months in struggling against the rapids of the streams, or in navigating the rugged passes of the mountains. But emulating the native warriors, they learn to overcome every difficulty, and it would seem in time there is no recess of the woods so dark, nor any secret place so lovely that it might not uphold the cold and selfish policy of the distant monarchs of Europe. Traveling in this wilderness are two daughters, Cora and Alice Munro, who are in search of their father, Colonel Munro, who is in charge of Fort Wigwam Henry. Each winter, the colonel burns cords upon cords of firewood inside the fort to keep warm. But it is so cold this winter, he thinks he might run out of wood. Colonel Munro knows his fire is barely enough to heat the center of the fort. So in desperation, the colonel decides to go out and find more wood. But this is not an easy task. There is more than the cold to be concerned about. There are the snow beasts, and on top of everything else, where are his two daughters? Cora and Alice Munro are entrusted to the care of Major Duncan Hayward, a soldier in the British Army. Along with a guide who calls himself James Fenimore Cooper, which means bear in Algonquin. Major Hayward is struggling to ensure the safe arrival of the girls at Fort Wigwam Henry, but knows very little about James Fenimore Cooper, with whom he places, it seems, an overextended trust. En route to Fort Wigwam Henry, Major Hayward, Cora, and Alice find themselves in the care of Hawkeye, a sure-shot white hunter with a powerful long rifle. Without hesitation, Hawkeye chases away the suspicious guide Cooper. With Hawkeye are two Mohicans, Chingachgook and his son Uncas. Instantly, Uncas and Cora Munro find themselves attracted to each other. But hiding in the brush, James Fenimore Cooper continues to stalk the travelers, ever lusting after Cora Munro. In an uncontrolled fit of desire, Cooper ambushes the girl, dragging her off into the woods like a beast, before realizing he snatched the wrong girl, Alice, by mistake. However, Cooper is unable to ward off his growing hunger. So he makes a frenzied meal of Alice till there is nothing left but bones. In a fevered run, Major Hayward and Hawkeye storm safely into the fort with the remaining daughter Cora and the two Mohicans. Cora is not sure because the land is all covered with snow. But Cora hears the snap of a dry twig from outside. Chingachgook and Uncas know it is James Fenimore Cooper and warn Hawkeye and Major Hayward to stay inside where it is safe. Luckily, the Cooper beast does not like the heat coming from the fire, so it cannot come too close to the fort. But their fire is getting weaker, and they have no more wood to make it grow. So as the fire dims, and the Cooper beast comes nearer and nearer. They all know soon James Fenimore Cooper will be at their door and will come inside and eat them. Then, just as the last tiny flame is about to disappear, and just as the Cooper beast is about to push its way into Fort Wigwam Henry, Chingachgook gets an idea. He speaks loudly so the Cooper beast can hear. "Look, Cora, your long-lost sister Alice has come back to visit us." With that, the Cooper beast is momentarily startled and wonders about these crazy words from the old Mohican. In that instant, Uncas joins in. "Alice, it's so good to see you again. Where have you been? Come in and tell us everything." So the snow beast is even more startled. And in that brief moment, something amazing happens. Its head becomes a tiny bit smaller. In a show of trust, the Mohicans invite the Cooper beast to eat. But James Fenimore Cooper cannot eat what they offer. It can only eat people. But the Cooper beast, now quieter, listens to all the stories it had missed while away. "You are welcome to live with us here, my sister," offers Cora. Listening to Cora, James Fenimore Cooper becomes smaller and calmer. Eventually, the snow beast Cooper decides to accept the Mohicans' offer to eat. And it goes over to the kettle of soup cooking over the flame. And in one quick moment, James Fenimore Cooper grabs the hot kettle and pours scalding soup into his throat and swallows all at once. With that, the beast's cold, icy heart is melted, and its head becomes even smaller, more like a person's face. And in the end, accepting Cora's invitation to live with them in Fort Wigwam Henry, James Fenimore Cooper joins the Monroe family, happily living out the remainder of his life as Alice Monroe. Ya-hey-ya de-to, so be ya-hey-ya de-to, ya-hey de-to, ya-hey de-to. So de ya-hey-yo, ya-hey-ya de-to, so be ya-hey-ya de-to, ya-hey de-to. Ya-hey, ya-hey, do. So de ya-hey, yo, ya-hey, ya-de-do. So be ya-hey, ya-de-do, ya-hey, de-do. Ya-hey, ya-hey, de-do. So do, so be ya de do, ya de do, ya de do. Thank you.